you know how to read, but today I want to share with you a little trick that I use to help analyze text on a bit of a deeper level. In order to do that, you're going to have to ask yourself two questions. First, what else is the author trying to tell me? And second, why did the author pick these particular words? In English, the average word has between 2 or 3 different synonyms, and many words have a double meaning. So for example, the word ear could mean my ear, or it could mean an ear of corn. Now, I learned this trick from reading the Bible. You see, if you're a believer and you're reading holy text, then you're often faced with the question, why are these particular words here? Why is this sentence here? And so you have to read in a different way because you're basically trying to justify why these particular words were chosen. Now, you can use the same method when you're reading almost any text, and today I want to talk a little bit about the charter, sort of continuing from where we left off in the previous 2 videos, and hopefully address some of the questions that you guys had below. So first, I want to start off right here. This is the word lech lecha. This is from when God tells Abraham to leave his home, leave his family, and go to a land that he will show him. The words that he particularly chooses are lech lecha, which is basically a repeat of the same word. It's go for yourself. And the question really is, why does God need to say go for yourself? Why couldn't he just say go? So this is one example, and I don't really want to turn this into a Bible class, but this is one example of why you have to analyze the particular words, and there's a lot of meaning in the go for yourself as opposed to just go. The second example that I want to pull up is one that you're probably familiar with, and it's the parable of the mustard seed. So if you have no idea about anything to do with mustard seeds, then the entire parable makes no sense. The whole story hinges on understanding mustard seed because it's a very small seed, but it grows into a much larger plant, probably a 2 to 3 meter plant. And so you're reading this text in a different way because you're looking at the particular words, because the words are often very loaded and the choice was often deliberate. And that's really something you have to keep in mind. A lot of times people write and they don't necessarily feel it's deliberate, but even if it's not intentionally or consciously deliberate, there may be some sort of a hidden message or underlying bias that you can pick up from why they made these particular word choices. So what does this have to do with the Charter, the Constitution Act? So pulling this back up, I want to point you to section 4.2. This is the Constitution Act 1982. This is the Charter. And so here, number 4, for example, and it talks about the demand to hold elections every 5 years, so that no legislature can sit for more than 5 years in the House of Commons. And here we have number 2, in time of real or apprehended war, invasion, or insurrection, the House may be continued by Parliament, and basically they can sit for longer than 5 because of these things. And so here you have 2 words that you really need to look at. There's the question, in a time of real or apprehended war. So you should stop and say, wait, why did they not just say war? And so we look at the 2 words. Real is, I guess you can imagine, a real war, a hot war as they would call it. But apprehended, well, the meaning apprehend right down here, to become aware of, to perceive, or to understand. So you'd say, well, how do you not understand that you're in a war? And the answer, again, if real is a hot war, then perhaps apprehended could be used to say a cold war. Now, I don't really know if you could justify not having elections because of a Cold War, or if there's some other sort of apprehended understanding of war that you could pull out, but there are definitely reasons why you may want to say, okay, it's not necessarily a real war yet because we haven't entered into the hot war phase. Perhaps this is Germany, 1939, 1940. The British called it the Boer War, B-O-R, like the boring war. And the Germans called it the Sitzkrieg because no one was doing anything for the first part of the war. And so, there may be some sort of perceived war where you don't understand, and there's definitely wiggle room, but it's important to note the word. So again, a real or apprehended war, you should really ask the question, why does it not just say war? Another place that you can look at is the LGBTQ rights that were read into the Charter. And so what do I mean read into the Charter? Now, if you go to section 15, it does not say anything about sexual orientation. So it talks about how everyone is equal before the law, and it does list sex as one of the ways that you cannot be discriminated against, but it doesn't say explicitly sexual orientation. Now, the courts decided in the Supreme Court case Egan versus Canada, they decided that section 15 should also include this because that's really what it meant, and so it's The Supreme Court held that although sexual orientation is not listed as a ground for discrimination in Section 15 of the Charter, it constitutes an equivalent ground. So it's equivalent to all these other ones in there that a person shouldn't be discriminated because of their sexual orientation. And that is really a consequence of the fact that it was written in 1982. And so obviously you have maybe some other grounds on a text, especially as you're talking about a text that is much, much, much older. So you could talk about the Bible, or you could talk about the Declaration of Independence of the United States, the Constitution. You can talk about the Charter again, even because it was 1982, and although it's not that long ago, it was a very different world in '82. And so you have sort of different words, different word choices, maybe words left out because the way that the thing is written and looking at the particular words are very, very important. Now, there's two sort of competing ideas that people have when you're talking about legalistic texts, and specifically with the Constitution. You guys may have heard this before, but I want to go over them again. So the first one is what is called the living tree doctrine, and this is what we in Canada have as the Charter. And so the doctrine basically states that the Charter is like a living tree, and it is constantly open to interpretation, and because it's organic, it must be read in a progressive manner and adapted to changing times. So just like the LGBTQ rights that were read in, if you will, they weren't added into the Charter, so they didn't go and add sexual orientation as a protected status or anything that you can't be discriminated against, but they basically read it in, and so they're understanding that Section 15, again, if it were written today, it would include such things as sexual orientation, and so LGBTQ rights are obviously protected and defended, and that was really what the intent of the thing was, to not allow discrimination. So that's one. That's the living tree document, and the LGBTQ rights is just, I think, the most obvious example of where something is read in, where it was rightfully, people were rightfully protected from being discriminated against by the sexual orientation, but it simply wasn't in there because of the times. Then you have the originalism, and this is often what you hear people discussing the Second Amendment in the United States, talking about the right to bear arms, the militia, the right to protect you from tyranny. And this basically says that the statements in the Constitution or the document should be interpreted based on the original understanding of the authors or the people present at the time. So, okay, at the time, maybe kind of like Shakespeare would use a particular sentence structure or particular form, then we should try and understand, what did Shakespeare mean? What did the people writing the Constitution mean? What did the people writing the Charter mean? What did they mean? And that's what we need to understand, because it's not just what we understand the words today, it's also what they meant. So we need to keep that in mind. And really, although one is called originalism and one is the living tree, they're both basically sets of interpretation, or a lens with which you interpret a document. Now, again, this is really important when you're talking about legal cases, because oftentimes it is the meaning of a word that really makes or breaks a case, and it's also important when you're reading a text. So I do want to look at, perhaps on another video, some media stories, and we'll try and go through them together, see if we can't pick up some of the biases or understand why a particular word was chosen. There's definitely a lot regarding the assault-style rifle ban. I mean, I'm sure just saying that is super loaded. I'm sure many of you are just as angry by that word choice as I am. But, that's really important to analyze the legal text. And especially, again, now with COVID, there's many articles about COVID that have sort of a bias. They're trying to push one way or another, push a particular opinion one way or another. And so these tools don't necessarily just provide a useful analysis on legal text, but for any sort of media, or really any document that you're trying to read, because ultimately the author is choosing particular words for a particular reason. It may be subconscious, they may not be trying to intentionally push anything, but this is what it is. Now, back to the Charter, the issue when you're talking about rights, or when you're talking about a legalistic document, between the two is that there has to be some sort of balance between the living tree doctrine and the originalism doctrine. Now, if you go and look at the Charter, there might be something that you can change, or that will get changed, that will eventually cause the document to not stand for its original intent. So, for example, the equality rights, you can start picking apart different words, and you might say that some of these words actually don't mean this, and so suddenly, equal protection. Well, what does that mean? They're getting similar protection. It's not exactly the same, but it's of equal benefit. And so therefore, because the equal protection and it's not really the exact same, but the benefit is the same, it's it's really actually the same, and so therefore we can change anything we want. Whereas again, the originalist point of view would say, no, you have to understand it as how they meant it. And so that's important, again, because these documents provide a shared frame of reference for us all to understand how these rights work or how these laws are supposed to work. And so you do have to have this sort of balance. And it's really the same with the Bible. Going back to the Bible, you have to understand what the original intent was, but because we're not riding donkeys, we're not all having fields in the way that maybe everyone did back at the time that the Bible was written, then you have to understand what is the intent. So when it talks about, people having to repay a neighbor, or when it talks about, what to do if you injure someone else's donkey or someone's animal, things like this, there's a particular line I'm thinking of, that if you see your enemy's donkey overburdened, you still have to help them. Now, the intent is that you should prevent animal cruelty, but it's not a suicidal document that you should then go and help your enemies in the middle of wartime simply because of some desire to have friendship. Now, again, that's something that is up for debate. It's something that you need to read, something you need to understand the different points of view. But the point is, look at the words. We really have to analyze the different word choices and think, why did the authors pick these type of words? And that will really give us a way to understand the documents and the text that we're reading. So I do want to tackle some of the questions. I know some of you had a lot of thoughts about rights. I'm talking about the rights as they are both de facto and de jure, because they are both in reality, and other countries perceive us and the Charter to be the law of the land. So if you have any questions about the sort of extraneous stuff, if any of you have been reading the comments, then just please let me know and we can tackle that at another time. But other than that, let's think if we can find some text, pull them apart, and see if we can reveal some biases maybe that's a little bit more hidden than average. So for True North, I'm Sam Eskenasi. Don't forget to subscribe. There's a lot of great work being done by a lot of my fellow contributors, so definitely check them out, subscribe, and continue watching this channel for more great information. Thanks a lot, and have yourself a great day.